Hi everyone, Tom here. Today I want to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on with progressive web apps. Now, what is a progressive web app? It's actually a combination of things, both technology as well as an approach to building websites. Think of it a little bit in terms of similar to the responsive and mobile-first movement of a few years ago. Now there's even more technology available to us, so we can do even cleverer things. And one of these things is making a website feel a bit more like an app. And what do I mean by that? Compare your experience with Facebook with your experience of loading BBC News. When you load your Facebook app, you have the navigation bar immediately available, and it will typically have an outline of the news stories that it's trying to load in, and then after a few seconds you'll receive it. Whereas if you're trying to visit a website, you get nothing and then you get everything. And that's not a great experience, and you're typically having to wait longer. You're probably having to wait the same amount of time you were for Facebook to load in the content, but you have nothing to look at in the meantime, nothing to interact with. Progressive web apps is, as I say, a multitude of things, but one of them is making websites feel a bit more like an app. And we have the technology now to actually save things like what they call an app shell. An app shell is your critical path. So on a website, that would be your header and navigation. So you've got your things like minicart and search in there as well. And you can save that. So on the first page load, it's saved. Then as you browse to other pages, that app shell, the user interface, the core user interface that people are familiar with, is loaded in straight away from browser cache, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript all together and in images, and then you can just load in the content. That gives a far better performance, and the user experience is far better. Now that's super cool. Now one of the technologies that allows us to do this is called service workers. Now what's a service worker? Without going into too much depth, what it enables you to do is take control of what is cached on your website. Now, previously, we've had to rely on browser cache for caching CSS, JavaScript, images, etc. And the downside is that while a browser caches these, it still needs to double check with the server that they're up to date before serving, and there's still that little bit of latency involved. Service worker, you've got complete control. So you're telling the browser this is cached, and you then would need to manage the cache expiration of those assets. What it can also do is, it can actually intercept any network request that's going out. So what that allows you to do is cache HTML, which is where things get really interesting. What this enables you to do is, support the process I mentioned earlier about caching your app shell so that it can be reused later. But it also means that you can provide offline support, which is super cool. So that means, as you're browsing Magento store, you can save the product page to cache, and if they were, on their phone and then happen to lose connection, they could go back to that product page by, just browsing that naturally, and it would be loaded without them knowing any different. And not only that, it would be loaded incredibly fast because it's all coming from the browser cache. Now, why am I telling you a bit about this? Well, we've been working on this heavily since coming back from Christmas break. We've wanted to see what we can do with progressive web apps in Magento. Because it's more about the way that you build things as well as incorporating some new technologies, it's actually quite hard to backport this into already built sites. So what we're doing is we're building a base theme with a suite of extensions as well that support the guidelines for a progressive web app. What this means is, if we meet all the guidelines when building our Magento sites to be a progressive web app, Chrome will, if a visitor visits the site twice in a row with at least 5 minutes gap, it'll actually get little push notifications to install it, and you can save essentially a website to the home screen and load it again later in full screen mode, so as if it wasn't even a browser. So there's lots of cool things and cool reasons to do it, and we were looking at how to incorporate it. So we've got that coming from Magento 2, so watch out for more info on that. But we were thinking, okay, well, there's hundreds and thousands of people on Magento 1. How can we backport some of this functionality to Magento 1? As I say, this isn't something that you would get all of the benefits, but the service worker side of caching is something that we can do. So what my colleague Thomas and Darren have been working on is a Magento 1 extension that is now available on GitHub that will install a very basic service worker that will cache all CSS, JavaScript, and images, so that as customers are browsing around the site, those will be loaded straight away. And that's going to make a noticeable difference on 2G and 3G connections, or if they've completely gone offline, then it also caches the HTML. Now this is going to be useful on Chrome and Firefox on the desktop, that those support this technology as well. But yeah, so caching of assets and responding with those on a aggressive caching nature, and then the offline pages is the way that we've gone with it for now. So what I'm going to do is, it's quite hard to work out what's the real difference that these are going to make. Now, it'll get much more interesting when we get to Magento 2, but I've got to build a demo now of the Magento 1 extension. So I'm going to do a sort of before and after, and you can see the difference. So let me swap to that. Here we have a Magento demo store with our PWA extension installed but disabled. Now, I've already got the page cached. There's just a community edition, and you can see if we visit the home page, because of got browser cache enabled, things are served from memory cache, and it loads in about 3 seconds. We can then go to the women's category. Haven't visited this before, so it'll take a little bit longer. The important thing with this test is it's not so much the time that it loads, because I've got a Docker environment running here. It's not going to be the speediest of development environments, but it's more about the improvement. So that's why we're doing it before and after. So now we're on the women's category. That loaded in about 5 seconds. I can go to the page again, refresh the page. Should be a bit quicker this time because there's some more assets that are in browser cache. But essentially, the fastest that we'll get on without the extension installed is about 3 seconds to page load. I can go back to the home page, and we'll see that probably comes out similar again. It happens to take a little bit longer, about 5 seconds. As you've noticed, what I've done is I've throttled to 3G in Chrome to make it a fair test between before and after, control precisely the speed that I'm getting. The other thing, a clear test, people will be familiar, you can go offline. We'll now try and go to the home page, and you'll get the dinosaur that most of us are familiar with. Now, if I go into configuration, I'll turn us back online first. Go back into configuration. We've the configuration for this extension is under Web, Progressive App Settings. So we can turn it on. That enables your service worker. You notice there are a couple of other settings in here. The main one of interest for this demo is the offline notification page. The extension automatically creates a CMS page that is also cached offline as soon as a customer visits the site. What this means, it just has a little description, so if a customer visits a URL they haven't visited before while offline, it gives them a nice friendly error message straight away, which I'll show you shortly. So if we press save, then I shall refresh cache and flush cache because Magento, and I want to be sure. And then go back to the application, refresh the home page. Obviously, the first page load, it's got to build up the configuration, so we might not expect it to be quick. We can see that we've already got a little bit of a difference here. Down the bottom of our network tab, we've seen the service worker has been initialized. We've got a little cog to indicate service worker related actions. And you can see that it's downloaded our offline page, ready for if someone goes offline. Now, if we visit the page again, we'll see a few more resources are loaded from and saved to the service worker. Now, because on the first page load, it just registers service worker. The second page load, as I mentioned, is where it starts actually caching it. So we won't see the performance benefits on this page. You notice this page took a bit longer. I think we actually triggered the config cache on this one. We must have hit a config cache previously. Now, if I refresh this page, now that we're serving from service workers, we were getting page load times of 700 milliseconds. We're still on like the regular 3G network throttling. So the difference between caching with browser cache versus caching from the service worker in this instance is like 3 times quicker in terms of actual load time. Now, if I visit the women's category, obviously the first one will have some improvement because there are some resources that are shared between pages, but there's others that are new, so it'll have to fetch and save to the service worker cache. So this page load, we're getting in about 3 seconds. If I refresh this page, it goes down to 700 milliseconds. Now, the last time we did that without the extension enabled, that was 3 seconds reliably. So this is super cool. The other thing to show you is if you go offline. So now we go offline. Let's visit the home page again. That loads at 400 milliseconds. It might seem a bit bizarre, that's even quicker, but that's because it knows for sure, because it knows it's offline, it knows for sure that it doesn't have to go to the server at all. So it can respond with everything from cache. So, we might not have the latest home page, but we're getting a response really quickly, and if we're offline, far better to give the home page as it was before than give nothing at all. So that's great, and we can go to women's, the same thing, and that loads in less than 400 milliseconds. So this is pretty damn sweet. Now, as I mentioned, you can go offline. So if we went to a different category, say man, or men rather. So now we're getting that offline CMS page, which we cached on our first instance, which is a much nicer experience. And it explains, we've got a little demo text in there at the moment explaining, what you can and can't do while you're offline. And so service workers, super cool. This is what we can do in Magento 1. Magento 2 coming soon with an awful lot more. Keep an eye out.